Today, we're going to talk about painting a colorful still life. And one of the things that's very difficult in painting a colorful still life is how do you keep your colors clean? We have one of the great experts about that, Sarah Sedwick. Welcome to Art School Live. How do you keep your colors clean? You're going to show us how to do it today?
Yes, I am. I'm going to do a little demo for everybody where I talk about a few of the main ways that I paint really colorful, saturated paintings, but at the same time, keep those colors from getting muddy as they come up against each other.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a big challenge. And so I think that's going to be really helpful for everybody. So why is painting a still life an important thing to do?
I think painting still life is an incredibly accessible way to begin practicing working from life, which is a key way to hone the skills we take to every other genre of painting.
Okay, so I want to question that just a little bit more because I think that's really an important point. So painting from life, for anyone who doesn't understand what that means, it means you're not painting from a photograph, you're painting from an actual object that's lit from the window light or from artificial light, but you're painting it where you're going to see it differently than from a photograph. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And so there are lots of times when artists want and need to paint from photos. And one way that we become better at managing the obstacles that working from that photo reference put in our way is practicing working from direct observation rather than photos. And I think still life is just a really accessible way to do that.
Well, photos are liars, and photos change shadows, they darken shadows, you lose the depth of the shadow because they have an iris in them that's not like the eye. They blow out the skies if the foreground's in focus, or they blow out the foreground, or if the sky's in focus, so you don't get a real representation of things. So this is going to be really good. Are you going to be painting? You're going to be painting from life today, or are you using a reference photo?
I will be painting from life. I'll have a photo of my still life up on the screen, so you'll be able to paint along, follow along, but I will be working from direct observation. Yeah, I've got a still life set up right behind me, but you'll see it on the screen as I'm working.
Okay, well, why don't you get set up and we'll get the show officially started.
Great.
It's Art School Live with Eric Rhodes.
Our guest today is Sarah Sedwick, and she is a rock star. You're going to love what she's going to be teaching you about painting a colorful still life and keeping your colors clean. And she is so good. Let me show you some of her work right now. You're going to get a feel for how she does this using real objects from life. And she's got such a nice, lively approach to her work. It's beautiful brushwork. It's really wonderful. So, Sarah, are you ready?
I am.
Okay. So you actually have a pile of oranges laid out.
Yes, I have this particular pile of oranges laid out, and that is just a photo of what I'm looking at in the studio. I have it lit with a warm light bulb. I think it's a 75-watt equivalent LED light bulb. And I've got an underpainting already popped up there on my 8x8-inch panel. And I'll talk about that a little bit more after I just quickly go over the palette of colors I'm going to be using today. Because one of the ways that I keep my high chroma, meaning intense, beautiful, bright, saturated, colorful paintings clean, is by limiting the palette of pigments that I actually use. So real quick, the 6 colors, 6 pigments plus white that I'm using on my palette today are Hansa Yellow, Cad Yellow Medium, Titanium White, Cad Red Light, Alizarin Crimson, Viridian, and Ultramarine Blue, plus the Titanium White. Like I said, I've got some solvent-free gel medium here, and everything else that you see going on my palette here are pre-mixtures. So pre-mixing my colors a little bit with a palette knife before I dive onto the canvas is one of the ways that I keep nice, colorful, nice, clean, colorful brush strokes, even when I am painting strong, bright, complementary colors that are so beautifully happening here in this still life.
So what have we got here? We have is this a canvas panel? Is it a board?
Yes, it's cotton canvas on panel.
Okay.
Okay.
And looks like you've done an underpainting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so I've done, first I do a tonal wash. For this one, I used raw sienna, which you can see right here on my palette, and I just gave it a tonal wash with Gamsol and then worked into it with some more of that raw sienna and then brought in a little bit of alizarin crimson and a little bit of ultramarine blue into that raw sienna, still keeping the paint really thin, just to darken up the darks. And I like having that simple value structure underneath the colors that I'm going to pop over the top. I don't paint right on it right away. Often I give it, 15 or 20 minutes while I spend some time mixing colors to sort of settle down and settle up.
Let it set up, yeah.
Yeah, just let it set up a little bit. I don't want it to be dry, but I want it to set up a little bit. Okay, so big tip number one for keeping your bright saturated colors clean is working from what I call vulnerable colors to less vulnerable colors. And my bright saturated oranges that are here in this painting are definitely vulnerable colors, meaning that if I put all that beautiful teal on first, like if I was to work from background to foreground, I might run the risk of, when I came to do those bright saturated oranges, getting them all messed up. Even if I switched brushes, even if I cleaned my brush really, really well, I'd still be fighting against all of that nice paint in the negative space, which, I paint 𝗟𝗶𝗄, and I generally like to get my paint on thick, rich, creamy, and in the first pass. So I don't want to go back in and be messing around with things a whole lot after the fact. I want one nice, thick, opaque pass. So a lot of artists work from dark to light. A lot of artists work from background to foreground. I really prefer to work from lightest and most saturated colors to darkest and least saturated colors, finishing with my neutrals. And talking about combining neutrals, or no color colors, as I like to call them, with really bright, saturated, intense colors is one way to create a painting with lots of bright, beautiful color in it that's also got harmony. So one issue that artists can run into when they're painting with a lot of bright, colorful pigments is they struggle with color harmony. I love that saying of, when everything is saturated, nothing is saturated.
Right.
It's like if you create a still life setup with every color of the rainbow and all of them are equally bright and saturated, even if you limit the palette of pigments, you may end up with a finished painting that appears kind of overwhelming to the eye, and possibly your viewer doesn't know where to start when they're looking at it. They might feel overwhelmed. And that's really what we mean when we talk about disharmony in a painting. The viewer doesn't know where to look, and they have kind of like a jangly, discordant experience. So limiting the colors in your still life, complementary colors like these, this nice bright red orange and the blue green being...
Perhaps you can explain to some of the viewers what a complementary color is.
So complementary colors are colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel. Having a color wheel in the studio is an absolutely great tool, just for quick reference. And So those colors, a complementary color pair completes the primary color triad. So think about the orange and the blue that I have here. Within that orange and blue, I have got all three of the primaries. So I have red and yellow in that orange, and I have blue on the other side. And so a complementary color pair contains all three of the primary colors within the two. And they're a natural fit for each other. They offset each other in a really nice way. They complement each other, as in that red sweater looks great with your green pants, but they also complete each other in terms of completing the primary triad of colors. And that's why complementary colors is spelled with an E and not an I, like, oh, your red sweater looks so good with your green pants today, Eric. And when you are trying to set up a really bright, colorful, and effective, harmonious still life, thinking about the color combinations that you are actually choosing for your objects, whether you're working from life or working from a photo, is really, really key. Because, as I always like to say, color mixing begins in the still life. So it might sound a little bit like rocket science, but the finished color scheme of your painting depends a ton. Whoa, that's very purple. Depends a ton on the colors and the color combinations that you choose for your actual setup.
If you're just tuning in, our guest is Sarah Sedwick, and we're learning to paint a colorful still life and how to keep our colors clean and not pollute one another.
And one thing I want to point out as I'm working along is that I'm not going to switch brushes, and I'm not going to do that Edward brush hands, as I like to call it, of having 6 different paintbrushes in my left hand. The left hand is for the rag only. And what I'm doing with that rag is I'm wiping off my brush periodically as I go. I'm just squeegeeing the paint out of that brush. And that, in addition to going back to the palette frequently to reload with clean color, is really helping me keep my colors clean as they're going on.
So are you saying if you had some of that blue in your brush and you wiped it out and then you went to a brighter, cleaner color, would that not pollute it? Or you're saying because you laid those brighter colors down earlier, it's not going to be a problem?
Really both. I try to start with the colors that I want to really protect and keep as bright and clean as possible. And so I've sort of got that established. I've got a nice thick first pass of the colors that I want to keep as clean as possible. In the places where I want the colors to kind of glow through, I've really picked my most saturated orange mixtures, meaning that these orange mixtures that I'm dipping into for the parts of the fruit that I want to be the most light and saturated are really only mixtures of like red and yellow, period. There's no white in them. There's none of the complement. They're just really, really 2 color mixtures. Whereas for something like back here, this orange that's sitting back here, it's not only in strong light, but it's also a supporting character in my composition. So maybe I don't want to reach for my purest mixtures. Maybe these mixtures have the 3rd primary, not just red and yellow brought in, but some blue or some purple even to neutralize them. So yeah, cleaning off my brush. When I tend to paint really with only one brush at a time. If I want a different brush mark, I will switch brushes midstream in a painting. But it just confuses me when I try to use more than one brush at a time. And so one way that I manage that while still keeping colors as clean as possible is, yes, I wipe off my brush a lot. I also have pre-mixed some piles of paint on my palette. So I haven't pre-mixed for every single color that I'm going to eventually use on the painting. This isn't meant to be paint by numbers. It's not meant to be an exercise where you try to mix for every color spot that you see on the canvas. But I want the basics pre-mixed before I dive on to the canvas so that I can just wipe off the brush and go right back to the palette into clean paint and do what I call cleaning the brush in the paint. So as I'm reloading the brush, any remnants of the last color that I used are either getting mixed into the next color I pick up and creating even more color harmony by kind of, you know, carrying the last color that I used forward, or they're getting, you know, wiped off partially and then completely cleaned off the brush when I'm picking up the clean paint. Okay, so I've got another big tip that I have for keeping your colors clean when you're working from lightest and most saturated out toward things that may still be saturated but are a little darker is painting outside the lines. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I started with this tonal underpainting, which was not super detailed, but which was pretty, you know, pretty detailed enough for me to be a roadmap forward into the painting. But one of the ways that I keep my paintings both loose and lively and colorful is once I've got that underpainting, I'm painting outside the lines. So I know that I can go right outside the lines with this bright, clean orange. And because the negative space, because that teal in the negative space that I'm going to come back in with is darker than those oranges, I can cover them. And so what I'm thinking of when I'm deciding what order to apply paint to the canvas in, there are a few things, but one of them is what am I going to be able to cover up with what? And so when I talk in terms of vulnerable colors, wanting to start with my lightest and most saturated colors, which are usually my vulnerable colors, like this bright, beautiful orange, I'm thinking in terms of what can I cover with what? Because I do want to layer my brushstrokes on top of each other. And I don't really want to get in here and finish anything in the painting before moving on to something else. That's another big trick I use for staying loose. So one trick I use is I paint outside the lines and then I suck back in from the painting from the outside in, using that negative space to refine my drawing and really get the kind of edges. Woo, got some stuff on there though. Really get the kind of edges that I want by working first from the inside out and then from the outside in, but also getting those edges that I want by having a lot of really thick paint in the first pass. I think one big mistake that artists make is they paint tentatively. They mix color tentatively and they apply paint tentatively. And in my workshops, we go through some simple exercises to help students get more comfortable really loading up the brush, because I think often that's an under-taught aspect of painting, you know, actually how to load the brush up for maximum effect. But also, most of us never push our materials to the fullest extent that we can. We don't even really know how much paint a brush can hold because we've never tried. And so giving people an opportunity to really test that out and give it a try is one of the great joys of mine in teaching. Like, scare yourself a little when you're painting. Why not? Okay, so as I said, first I paint outside the lines and then I paint from the outside in. And because I don't think I've gone dark enough on that orange upstairs. One more. It wants to be warmer. And so with these pre-mixed colors that I've made, I'm still changing them. I do a combination of pre-mixing with a palette knife and mixing as I'm painting with a brush, mostly altering things for temperature, sometimes a little bit for value. I'm much more concerned with getting the values correct when I'm pre-mixing based on what I'm looking at as I'm observing the still life in front of me, getting correct values first, worrying about tweaking color temperature and actual exact color mixtures a little bit more as I go forward mixing with the brush. I don't love what I did there, but I want it to glow. And it's very hard for me to judge the correctness of what I've done here until I get a little bit of paint up in the negative space. Then I can really start making decisions about whether I like what I did. So the first place that I like to go when I'm working into the negative space is not, you know, way out here in the corner away from what I've already painted. I like to kind of put a painting together the way you might put a puzzle together, meaning I don't, well, who knows, I'm not a big puzzle doer, but I imagine that you would want to go to the next piece, to the contiguous piece, to the next door area and start looking for the next puzzle piece to add. And that's what I like to do in a painting is paint next door. When in doubt, go paint next door, because one decision that you make on a canvas, I'm sure you can relate to this, Eric, leads to the next decision. Whether you're painting a landscape, still life, a portrait, every decision influences what comes after it. So I like to, as I move on to the next part of the painting that I'm going to fill in, just go next door, because I can make a better decision that way when I've got something to compare. And what am I comparing? I am comparing values. So yes, I'm a big pre-mixer and a big proponent of pre-mixing paint, but I am not really trying to match color when I'm doing that as much as I'm trying to match value and value relationships. There we go. That's the warmth I wanted to get in there. That's pretty important, because one concept that I like to think about when I'm painting is something I call color sharing. And it really comes into play when we've got a bright, saturated still life like this. It's easy to see the way that color bounces around. You shine a strong light source on something and colors from one object are going to bounce around and influence the colors of everything else. So some of that hot orange from the fruit, especially where it turns under and starts facing the ground, is going to influence the cast shadows and even the light ground around them, and vice versa. Some of the color from that bright teal ground is going to pop back up into the oranges and change our color perception of them a bit. And that's a lot harder to see when you're working from photos. That kind of magic that I like to call color sharing.
Sharing is caring.
Absolutely. And you do need to, so I like to say that every time I go into the studio and say, today I'm going to set up a simple still life, it's like the kiss of death, because setting up a simple still life is a lot more complicated than you might think. I mean, every time I go in to set up a simple still life, I always have to laugh at what I end up with, because it just becomes crazy. But, you know, for a daily painting, for a practice painting, a painting that you just, you feel like painting, you don't know what to paint, I am a big fan of saying, you know, just take the pressure off. How complicated does it have to be? This is half an orange cut up into slices, put together with a pleasing complementary color, combined, and this is important, combine these hot, overwhelming colors with some lovely neutrals. So, whoops. So not only am I getting the effect of really bright, intense, saturated, gorgeous color in my painting by choosing bright oranges and bright teals and choosing to use complementary colors, but I'm offsetting those bright saturated colors on my canvas with some neutrals. So
You're doing such a great job teaching. I'm just being very quiet. So someone commented about that. Would you tell us about the edge of the shadows? Because one of the things you did is you laid down a softer, looks like blue under that far left orange at the edge of the shadow. Can you that on the yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. One thing that I think artists struggle with when they're painting shadows in particular is flatness. And you hear a lot of art teachers talk about getting air in your shadows. So I really think that cast shadows need to be appropriately neutral or they won't feel like shadows because we don't see color in the dark, keep in mind. So if something's too chromatic, too saturated and intense, it isn't going to feel like a shadow. But at the same time, shadows are a great place to play with temperature shifts, with color shifts all the time, though. You got to be thinking about air in your shadows. Have you heard the term air in your shadows before? Have you read an art teacher say you just need to get some more air in your shadows and you have not understood what they were talking about? Me too. So what that means is shadows, when they're just dark, dense, and all kind of flat, the same, can feel like black holes on the canvas. They can feel like, yeah, very flat. And one way that we keep shadows from feeling like flat objects on the canvas instead of what they are, which is airy, ethereal, non-objects themselves, in and of themselves, is we shift them. We shift them in value as they move out and away from their objects. First, we got to keep them just colorful enough to be beautiful, and then we got to keep the value right, but we also need to keep them feeling that beautiful ethereal shadow quality. Here I'm pumping some of that mixed orange and a little alizarin into a kind of violet purple that I mixed up, because probably even in the photo, you can easily see how much orange is happening in that shadow on the white ground. And so that white ground is the key to what I'm hoping is going to make this painting really sing. If the whole background was this bright saturated teal and then I had the orange against it, yes, that would be beautiful, but it might be a little bit hard to look at. Here, I'm actually going to put some more air right here in this shadow.
So is that are you using looks like a neutral titanium?
It's titanium white. It's actually a fast dry titanium white, but yeah, there might be just a tiny little bit of zinc. Yeah, it's a minuscule amount of zinc in it, but it's mostly a titanium white, yes.
Yeah, it looks a little buff colored to me from here.
So up here on the palette is my �11 titanium white, but down here on the palette, these are 3 whites, quote unquote whites, that I mixed up for my light negative space. So white is never really white in a painting. We can't just take a bunch of titanium white and start slapping it on there and have it come out looking nice. At least I can't. And I want as much color in my whites as possible. I keep my dark, I keep my my colors a little darker, then I'm actually observing them in the world so that they can be more colorful. You know, less white equals more color, slightly darker value also equals more color, and I want really colorful, beautiful paintings. And so when I'm mixing color for white, these mixtures down here, they're essentially a combination of the raw sienna plus white. That one's cooler. I added a little more blue to it to neutralize it. But because my light source is warm, see that brush is a little dirty, some of that orange is getting into there. I don't mind that at all. I want it to be happening. Okay, so I don't want to do too much of this white before I get the teal on there. But one of the keys to making this painting really sing and making the saturated, bright, beautiful colors, the intense colors on this canvas feel even more beautiful and intense is having neutrals around in the setup to offset them, to play them against. Yeah, I think a combination. So whether that means that you put like a white cup in to a still life like this, that would work very nicely. Or even something like metal. You know, metal is a no color color, and it's got the added advantage of having reflections of everything that's going on. That's a little complicated for a demo like this, but I love painting metal and I love using it for exactly that purpose. I'm just going to switch to my little
Well,
bit.
the question is, do you listen to heavy metal when you're painting heavy metal?
When I was younger, the answer would have definitely been yes to that question. I've gotten a little more chill in my advancing years. Yes.
That's a lovely, that mixture you're using for that white is just lovely.
Yeah, thank you. And because I'm using a warm light source, I've got a lot of opportunity. I could even go a little farther with it between the combination of the warm light source and the light bouncing down off of the orange slices. I have a lot of opportunity for adding even more. Let's just make a tint of some alizarin. Some orange. I have a lot of opportunity for adding even more color to my whites. And you know, that's a whole different demo. Maybe we'll save that for the next time I'm on Art School Live. We'll talk about packing more color into your whites.
I like it.
Yeah, I'd love to. But let's get to some of the fun stuff. Let's get to.
This has all been fun.
Yeah, but I really love painting teal. And I'm thinking, it's too dark. I'm thinking that when I come in around these orange slices with that teal, it's going to really pop them out. Okay, so I just added a fair amount of white to that mixture, which was mostly Viridian on ultramarine and titanium white, but I find that I want it to be even lighter to really pop out that dark rind of the orange. I don't want to go too light in value with it by adding white, because the more white I add to a color mixture, the less chromatic it will be. Now, I know this feels really, 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 really chromatic, and some of you are going, wait a minute, she doesn't have phthalo on that palette? And no, the answer is no. I don't have phthalo on the palette. I really think one way of keeping color harmony in your paintings is by limiting the amount of pigments that you put out on your palette in the first place. And this is a 6-color and white palette. My 2 blues are Viridian, which I treat as a blue and think of as a blue. My 2 blues are Viridian and ultramarine. I don't have any of the phthalos. And I really think that in most cases, you can achieve the look of these. Ooh, it's so bright. You can achieve the look of these bright, saturated, kind of man-made colors without needing synthetic man-made pigments at all. And really, if you're gonna do something, that got a little dirty. Really, if you're gonna do something like bring a phthalo into your palette, you may be making extra work for yourself because you're going to have to keep an eye on it. We all have experienced maybe how phthalo can misbehave a little bit when you turn your back on it, even for just a second. And so I don't know. I don't use a lot of phthalo. The warm underpainting that I've chosen to use is also helping me out here a lot, because when you put these cool colors over a warm underpainting, they're going to pop even more, especially when you first start putting them on. You might think, oh gosh, I'm going to soften that cast shadow edge right as I apply the paint. Beautiful. You might think, oh yeah, I really mixed that too saturated there, but you didn't. You know, you got to trust the palette. Against a warm underpainting, a lot of times your colors will feel, especially your cool colors, will feel more saturated than they actually are. And so if they looked okay on the palette, give yourself a little more information by getting some more color down on the canvas before you make any decisions about whether something is right or wrong. And that brings me to another point I would like to make about keeping freshness and looseness in your paintings, which is don't just give things a chance to be done. Don't try to finish any one area of a painting before moving on to another area of a painting.
Bounce around.
Yeah, bounce around. Let it all come up together. Don't get bogged down working and overworking any one area to get it perfect before moving on to another part of the canvas. Because often something that you do in a totally unrelated area of the canvas will just magically cause that unresolved or area that you thought might be unresolved to become finished without you having to touch it again.
So there's a comment. Carl says, I noticed the blue on the palette looks completely different than the blue being brushed in the background. Do you see that on your end?
Well, maybe the light is not totally consistent on my palette as far as what the camera is picking up. One of the reasons that optically it might be looking different up on the canvas is because of that warm underpainting, the orange. Yeah, underpainting. It really causes especially cool colors to go on feeling cooler, brighter, and more saturated than they might have on the palette. My palette is white. My canvas is orange. And we know that with perception, comparison is key. So this blue color mixture, which again is mostly viridian, ultramarine, and white, is gonna look way different. I want to have a little temperature shift in here and darken that up.
Catherine is asking if you would tell us the colors you used to make the orange.
To make the orange. So the reds on my palette are cadmium red light and alizarin crimson, and the yellows on my palette are cadmium yellow medium and Hansa yellow, which is a transparent yellow. And most of the oranges that I mixed from the cadmiums. In mixtures like these, where they're going down a little bit darker, I would have used alizarin for that one because it's my blue-red, bringing in just that little hint of the feeling of the complement. But in large part, the oranges are just the cadmiums. Cadmium yellow, cadmium red. Okay, the canvas is not covered. What have I not done? And that's one of the tricks that this kind of tonal underpainting will play on you. And also an advantage it can give you that you don't really have to, okay, going from teal to back to white. I do need to clean my brush. But still sticking with the same brush, that kind of warm tone that I put on this canvas, cotton canvas panel.
I think, Sarah, you're a great teacher.
Oh, well.
And I think
you.
we should all give her a thumbs up and applause because you're so good at explaining these concepts.
I appreciate that so much, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, we'd love having you. We'll have you back.
Painting and talking and sharing my love of painting and helping painters of all levels, talking especially, you can probably tell I love to talk, but teaching and helping painters of all levels either expand their practice or get back into painting after some break or something is just one of the greatest.
I love the reflection of the orange on that white where it's kind of showing through a little bit.
Mm-hmm. That little correspondence right there between the orange and the ground, and there's a little bit of its shadow. And you know what you start to realize is you don't have to put an outline around everything. You don't have to paint, as I'm looking around for outlines that I may have missed, opportunities I may have missed for lines.
By the way, we put Sarah's website information in case you want to go to one of her workshops or do something with her.
Yes, I'd love to have you join me for a workshop. I have several more coming up this year, including, well, it's not really a workshop, but it's worth mentioning, an appearance at Realism Live this fall.
We're very excited about that. What are you going to do on Realism Live?
Well, I am participating in Essentials Day, which is day one of the convention, and my presentation will be called Mixing and Understanding Colors. So we did not have a whole lot of chance to get into how this palette was crafted today, just kind of dive right in with the painting.
That's going to be so good.
My presentation for Realism Live is going to be a really deep dive into mixing, and there's going to be some painting too, of course. So looking forward to it.
I'll tell you guys about Realism Live at the end of the show. I'm not going to get into it right now. Thank you for doing that, though. We're excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time last time I did it.
Well, it's so fun when you get people from all over the world watching. Thousands of people communicating and in the chat and learning and growing from the top artists in the world. It's really fun.
Yes. And I know I've got some friends from all over the place tuning in today to cheer me on. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Tell us where you're watching from if you haven't done that. I've seen a lot of people, India, the UK,
Ooh.
Canada, Italy. But tell us where you're watching from.
Fantastic. Well,
or what state or what city. We'd love to see it.
I appreciate it. And I'm joining you from my home on the West Coast in Eugene, Oregon, where it is morning. So whatever time you are watching from, I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, well, you had to get up early to do this.
I had to get in the studio a little earlier than I usually might, yes.
Ireland, Germany, New Jersey, Amalfi Coast. Love it.
Wonderful. Okay, and so I've got paint all over this canvas right now. And as I like to say, once the canvas is covered, you get to do the bells and whistles. Details don't create form, but once you do get that whole canvas covered, you get to start taking a mental step back and saying, what does this painting need? At this point, you might be looking a little bit less at your subject or your photo reference and a little bit more just at your painting and saying, okay, so how could I maybe, for example, how could I maybe take that area of teal that's a little bit flat and a little bit plain back there behind those oranges and spice it up? I like to bring in what I call a hot spot or two to essentially really like shine a spotlight on my main characters, emphasize my focal points, get a little bit of fun brushwork into the negative space, or maybe that was too much.
Question is, are your shadows hotter as they are closer to the oranges?
Answer, yes, yes, indeed. Well observed. And why might that be happening?
Describe hotter.
So when we talk about temperature, the warmer colors, the hotter colors are on the red, yellow, and orange side of the color wheel. And orange fruit definitely falls nicely on the hot side of the color wheel. And because that color is bouncing around all over the place in this still life under this hot light source, I've really taken advantage of that. And I've even brought in, so this is like my cast shadow color that I mixed up, and I've just basically brought in some alizarin crimson right into that blue violet that I mixed up, because I really am feeling a lot of influence of that orange rind into the gas shadow color. Watching colors mix in my eye, taking some risks with color as I'm painting and applying paint to a canvas. These are some of the great joys of painting for me, because, you know, everything doesn't have to be so literal all the time. And one thing that we get better at when we practice working from life is making things up, taking those little risks that tell us that it could actually really be okay to not do everything exactly by the book or exactly like it looks in the photo. Observing from life, there's a nice highlight, really gives us an opportunity to push our color seeing, try things that we might not have observed working from certain references. Excellent. And yeah, even in the shadow down here in the so-called white area where it slides up under the orange, and even over here where it gets closer to the orange, I've definitely warmed it up.
Yeah, so white, the one thing we have to always be telling ourselves is white is not white.
No, white is not white. And yeah, so I tend to, instead of refer to a color like this in my painting as a white, I would either call it a very light neutral or I'd call it a no color color. But having these neutrals in addition to your whites, I'm going to take that and I'm going to even warm it up a little bit. Having these neutrals in the setup, in your composition, to offset these really hot saturated colors makes them even more intense and beautiful, and actually easier to look at because it gives the eye a break, a little place to visually rest. And we want to think about, or I'm doing what passes for blending in my world right now, because I'm going through and I'm saying, okay, who are my main characters, my star players, and who are my supporting characters right now? And one of my main characters is this guy over here. Of course, I'm loving the interaction between these two, and that's very important to me, especially this lost edge where the whites come together. I really like that. Lost edges are one of the keys to my style of painting, which I call loose realism. And you can search and follow the hashtag loose realism on Instagram if you want to see some more examples of not only my work, but work by other artists who like to work in this style. It's really fun. And lost edges, where two areas of value come together and they're close enough close enough in value, if not exactly the same. And they really shouldn't need to be exactly the same, but we don't perceive a line anymore when we squint. And so if we don't perceive it when we squint, we don't have to paint it, which is a joy. It's a joy to look at, and it's a joy to execute, and it's efficient.
This is making me hungry. I now have to go and find oranges. I have to go to the store. I don't have any.
Well, that's a huge compliment. Thank you.
I'm gonna eat the painting.
Well, you got to buy it first.
Oh, you're good.
No free lunches.
Literally.
Yeah. And so I think that I'm missing an opportunity for a little more color right there. I don't think I want to go quite as colorful as all the way to that teal. I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to bring, it needs to be a little bit darker so it can be a little more colorful. And I'm going to bring some of that teal into some neutral, neutralize it with some orange, but still it's going to look teal, and it will be related back to that ground back there. Lovely. Lovely, lovely. When I'm painting 𝗟𝗶𝗳𝗄, I am still painting in layers. I don't do a ton of scraping. I do like to remember that it's an option. Painting wet on wet in oils to scrape away paint when you want or need to make changes, absolutely. But I don't do a ton of that unless I really find myself in a jam. So what I do is I use mediums to help me layer wet paint onto other wet paint to pretty much add some extra glue to help wet paint stick to other wet paint, which is what we call painting 𝗟𝗶𝗳𝗄 or direct painting. Wet on wet.
So we're going to wrap in about 3 minutes, 4 minutes.
Wonderful.
Time flies when you're having fun. You've really gone a long way on this.
You know, start with freshness and energy and maintain that throughout, and stop yourself a little sooner than you might ordinarily do. These are some of my major tips for keeping freshness and energy in your work, because Eric, I think we all know how to overwork a painting and just kill it dead.
Yep.
Yep. But how many of us know how to stop ourselves while we've still got that freshness and energy in our work? So,
well, great tips today.
Thank you so
It's
much.
been terrific.
I've had a lot of fun.
Yeah, we all have. You're so good at this.
How about we finish the demo with a little signature? I always get asked about how I sign my paintings. If I could find my signing brush, that would be great.
All right.
So I use a very small liner brush. That's a size 0 liner. I don't use a rigger. I find I can't really control it very well. And I love to sign my paintings while they are still wet, because I can use a color from the actual palette. And for this one, I think I want to use that teal. And unlike other paint that I would layer on top of other paint where I would only put medium in it and never go back to the Gamsol, I do thin my paint out with Gamsol a lot before I sign. And it's also the only time during a painting where I'm going to anchor my hand on my other hand. I'm going to anchor my wrist and then just hold my breath and sign. There you go.
Ta-da.
Ta-da.
Nice. Very nice.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you
do
so
us
much
a
for
favor, Sarah, if you possibly can you either take your panel and hold it a little closer so we can get a sense of what it looks like up close?
Yes, I can.
All right.
And I'll turn off all of this business too.
All right. You're very well organized.
The secret is OBS. It's a broadcasting
Yeah.
system. Is that better?
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. Okay, you guys, lots of applause and hearts and thumbs up. Really, really nice job. You get a real feel for the brushwork when you hold it up like that. And those oranges do look like light is coming through them, and they're glowing, don't they? Really beautiful. Outstanding. I like the edges on these shadows too. Would you talk about that just briefly?
Sure. So one of the main ways that I get you got to have soft edges on your shadows or they will not feel like shadows. I mentioned getting air in your shadows, and that's not quite the same as getting soft edges on your shadows, but it's related. And so the main way that I get nice soft edges on my shadows, which helps them feel like shadows, is I paint the shadow, the dark first, and then I come in and paint the light around it. So I have a nicely loaded brush and I paint right up to the edge of that shadow. And then I pull back on the throttle a little bit so I'm not pushing quite as hard.
Well, that's
And
a good way
just
to
kind
do it.
of massage the paint right into the other paint. Here, I can do it a little bit on this one down here too. So painting, I really press pretty hard with the brush to get my normal brush stroke. But then as I approach the edge of the shadow, I pull back a little and then massaging that light paint into the dark paint. When I'm painting cast shadows, I almost always, there's one that needs to be softened too.
All right.
I almost always paint the dark shadow first and then put the light paint around it. That's how I get the edges that I like.
Nice. Outstanding. Why don't you come on camera real quickly so everybody can see you if they weren't here from the beginning. Nice job on that. Thank you.
Just want to put that down so it doesn't fall.
All right. Our guest today is Sarah Sedwick. And if you didn't see the whole thing, you got to watch it from the beginning. It's mesmerizing, really mesmerizing.
Here I go.
Okay, there you are.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you are a rock star painter, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Eric. You know what? You are also a rock star, and it's been an honor to be with you today.
Thank you. Thank you. We've told everybody in the chat how to get to your website and what your Instagram is and all that stuff. So make sure to go in there and check out Sarah, check out her workshops, etc. Great stuff. Thank you, Sarah.
My pleasure, Eric. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye. Okay, you guys. Well, that wraps up another one. I got a couple things I want to tell you about. First off, Sarah mentioned Realism Live is coming up. That's in November, and some of the top realist artists, and we have subjects from still life to portrait to figure to landscape. It's a real high variety, and some of the world's leading artists who are going to be teaching that. And that's 3 days of intense learning plus one optional essentials day, and that's where Sarah's going to be. And everybody pretty much does essentials day because, you know, everybody needs to learn all these things and remind themselves of these things. And so what a terrific opportunity to learn. It's all online. That way you don't have to travel. You can just go online. And so check it out at realismlive.com. We also have Pastel Live coming up in September, and that's a great way to learn how to paint. If you're new to painting, pastel is a real good entry point because you don't have to get all that complexity, but it's also very vibrant and very wonderful. So check it out. We have a free gift for you today. If you were watching, it's 97 Incredible Art Secrets from the world's leading artists. Just go to 97artsecrets.com/free. It is, by the way, a couple hours of video tips, 97 tips from some of our top artists of the videos we produce. We do a thing, we have over 700 professionally produced, high definition, high quality art instruction courses at PaintTube.tv. You have an app, you can watch it on Roku, Apple TV, Fire, on your phone, your tablet, etc. Or, of course, you can get DVDs still. We still offer that because a lot of people still want that too. But most people are doing downloads these days. Anyway, check that out at PaintTube.tv. And thanks again for being here. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine. A reminder, 5 That's the number 5. If you watch 5 of these programs, and they're all on YouTube at Art School Live, any 5 of them will give you the confidence that you need to realize, hey, I can do this. I can become a painter. On Mondays, we do Marketing Mondays, where we do art marketing help. On Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we have guest artists. And on Fridays, we do Feedback Fridays. And this Friday, I'll be giving feedback on and critiques on several paintings that have been submitted. You guys want to submit paintings? All you got to do is go to artschool.live, and I think there's a submission button. Is that right, or did I get that wrong? I probably got it wrong. Okay. Anyway, we probably don't have a slide of how to submit paintings, but it's probably too late anyway for this week. But we'll tell you more about it in the future. Thanks again to Sarah. Oh, there we go. Submit your paintings at streamlinepublishing.com/feedback-Friday. All right. Terrific. Thank you for being here, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks again to Sarah Sedwick.